Hello and welcome to the Tonearm, where we connect you with the people and ideas moving culture forward. I'm your host, Lawrence Purrier. Most people know Nels Cline as Wilco's guitarist for the past 2 decades, but his range goes far beyond indie rock. He spent 40 plus years moving between jazz clubs, punk venues, and studios where the rules get bent or thrown out entirely. Rolling Stone put Nels on their list of the top 100 guitarists of all time, but that tells you absolutely nothing about how he actually plays. His current project is Trio of Bloom, and it pairs him with keyboardist Craig Taborn and drummer Marcus Gilmore, out on Pyroclastic Records. The three had never played together before producer David Breskin brought them into the studio in November of 2024. What came out sounds like a band that's been working together for years, full of ambient drift and barbed funk that explores the outer edges of dub. We're putting the Tonearm's needle on Nels Cline today to talk about how this project came together and so much more. Here's Nels Cline. I was really intrigued by the comment I read of yours that you were somewhat daunted. That was the quote going into the sessions for this record, for Trio of Bloom.
Mm-hmm.
I think what I'm curious about as it relates to that comment, that implies a lot of things. It could be butterflies, it could be amped up, it could be all kinds of things. But what it doesn't seem to be is an uncertainty that causes you to choke because you show up, right?
Yeah. Well, that's actually a very interesting point you're making. Yeah, I mean, I do a lot of things that I feel I might suck at, but I still do them. You know what I mean? I say yes, and then I hope for the best. Craig and Marcus they're like absolute wizard level. And, I feel like that I personally am really more the sort of garage band guy that heard Coltrane and Miles, and of course like King Crimson and the Allman Brothers Band and Jimi Hendrix. So it's like I'm not coming from as deep of a well of knowledge and technique as them.
When you're in those contexts, what are the other musicians, what do they look for in playing with Nels?
I don't know. I think in Craig's case, he was familiar with a lot of stuff that I've done, more so than I actually realized. Craig and I would run into each other periodically when I still lived in Brooklyn. He lived pretty close by, right off Flatbush. And we ran into each other a couple of times in airports, but I'd never played with Craig, nor Marcus, who I'd never met. So I definitely can't speak to Marcus' impressions or expectations of me. In Craig's case, I think he's aware of a bunch of my stuff, and we have so many friends in common, people who've played with Craig on and off for years and years. So that was actually one of the things I might have been thinking about it now, that I might have been hanging on to kind of bolster my confidence in this situation. But so Craig was probably expecting some funny noises and maybe some attitude, some musical attitude, not attitude from me personally, but some intensity, some edge of some sort, or the ability to go there. And I suppose versatility. Certainly Craig and Marcus are extremely versatile. And then we had David Breskin there as our producer, Svengali, who started this whole thing, making suggestions and sort of brainstorming here and there with us.
So when you all assembled for the sessions, it seems like it was an incredibly productive few days. I think I have 2 questions about the sessions. Going in, how did you prepare when you don't have the same benefit of long-term collaborations and real professional musical relationships like you have in some of your other contexts? What do you need to do to show up, be ready to go? And then my other question is, did you all arrive knowing that you needed to leave with a record done?
Okay. It was pretty luxurious from my standpoint because David gave us 3 days to record, which is 1 day longer than probably usual, at least certainly for me. I guess I would have assumed that we could get a record done in 3 days. I mean, I think we would all have no doubt about that. That's just my point of view about that. As far as preparing and not having played together, we did have some parameters set up by David, so, assignments, if you will. And that was to bring in 2 original pieces, and they could be pieces that we had done before that would now be revisited and revamped, and then a cover song, an unoriginal piece by someone else. That gave us some direction in its own sort of general way. I had no idea what Craig and Marcus were going to bring in. I was really nervous about whatever they might write because my music reading is really terrible. I'm a kind of like typical boomer rocker dude that is mainly self-taught, except for music theory, which I had a great music theory teacher ultimately. But, I started my music studies like midway through high school, and this would have been 1972 or so. Started discovering this music that was well beyond my grasp, and attempts to get decent teachers failed so I was a philosophy major in school until I said, I can't kid myself. This is not what I want to be doing. I want to play. So I started over with music studies, but only in theoretical studies, not in technical studies. So I'm very much self-taught on the instrument. And I was afraid they were going to write some super intense, really hard to play music. And I was asking to please send it ahead so I could be working on it a couple of months before the session. And that didn't happen. So I was glad that the music wasn't super brainiac, insane, hard to play and hard to read ultimately, but it didn't help my nerves not knowing what they were going to bring in. In the case of what I brought in my prep, I knew that Marcus had not just the ability, but also, I think, maybe a propensity to play steady, multifaceted groove and just sort of stay the course. That was something I sort of kept in the back of my mind that we might want to exploit at some point, which usually makes me think ostinato, some sort of worked out groove. And then I wanted to do this piece of mine that was on the singer's record, Initiate. It was just an intro to the live disc, an excuse to just like make a big racket at the end. So I fleshed it out a little and turned it into kind of what I was conceiving of as a drum concerto of sorts. So it just gets louder and louder. And Craig had complete freedom until this melody, which I didn't have initially on Initiate, comes in, and then he's sort of free and playing the melody, but Marcus is just ramping up as intensely as he can. And the result was quite satisfying for me. It's like really like an avalanche of drums, which makes me really happy. I was so stoked when we finished that take. And then we did a lot of production kind of overdubbing, a lot of things like that. A friend of mine who was just texting me yesterday, we were going back and forth, many of my friends, about Jack DeJohnette's passing. And then he mentioned how much he's listening to Trio of Bloom and how he wanted to ask me some questions about the overdubbing, and because it feels to him like we're just really playing in a room. And there's really quite a lot of, I guess you'd call it, production involved with something like Forge, the piece I'm talking about, where I like to double guitars. So they have just extra overtones. And then I overdub the melody, and Craig overdubbed, I think, the melody at the end.
Yeah.
And then he was free the rest of the time. So I also really like that. He had my part in front of him, but I just let him do whatever he wanted because I know it's going to be good. And then that I conceived of as an intro to the Terje Reepdahl piece called Bend It. And just, I've been obsessed with this record since it came out. I guess it came out in 74, 73 maybe. It's one of my favorite records. And it also is kind of overlooked, I think. A lot of people focus more on Terje's kind of more sweeping Miles meets Pink Floyd kind of stuff that he ended up doing a little bit later, and that he's become really well known for, kind of more of a rock and almost like a classical music sense of drama and that spaciness, that sort of glacial thing. And what comes after is definitely coming more out of the sort of Joe Zawinul, Weather Report, John McLaughlin world, and has some of these sort of more classical elements with the oboe, but Bar Phillips is really free on it, and Bendit is also an ostinato. So I just looped the bass, and we played to that. So that's another thing that I was doing to prepare mentally for what I would contribute, so we could have some sort of like free. It's very free, but I also dedicated myself to trying to play Terry Riepdahl's what I'm assuming is an improvised series of chords at the beginning, and try to play them exactly the way he played them, just out of pure obsession and just an homage of sorts. I guess I'm straying from talking about how I prepare for something like this, but I guess I wanted it to be really pretty open so that we could mess around and find our language. And that's kind of what it sounds like to me. I find my playing on Bandit to be a little disappointingly conservative, but Marcus and Craig do amazing stuff on that take. So I just have to live with my boring ideas.
Commemorated for all eternity.
Yeah, I can't. It's just like the endless conundrum of surrender. There's a story, and I'm seriously paraphrasing, that I heard years ago, and I think it was John Abercrombie that told the story about George Mraz listening back to a John Abercrombie quartet piece, a take. As you might imagine, when you're playing live in the studio and you're trying to capture performances and there are solos involved, inevitably this moment where, and in this case, it was George Mraz bass solo, they're listening to it and everyone's looking, see what his reaction is. He going to like it? We're feeling pretty good about this, but let's not say anything, because if he doesn't like the bass solo, maybe we'll have to do it again, whatever. So all eyes were on George Mraz, and he said something to the effect of, well, I guess I'm just going to have to get a bigger house. And they all got question marks over their heads.
That's so
funny.
funny.
And what do you mean by that? And he said, I've been saying I can live with it for so long, I'm running out of room. Something to that effect. And that's sort of the conundrum of listening to something and wishing you had played something better or more exciting or more interesting or more accurate, and then having to just shrug your shoulders and go like, well, I guess that's going to have to be it, and move on to the next thing. That's kind of how the music is inherently, but it's also how these kind of records get made. I mean, I'm not a perfectionist by any means. I do wish that things were sometimes more succinct, sometimes more exciting, whatever, but I just move on to the next thing pretty much right away without too much agonizing. But I do find myself quite often disappointed in myself.
Wow.
So that's that. But I'm just saying, there's a really nice feeling of freedom on that version of Bandit, and it's really coming from Craig and Marcus. They just play amazing stuff on that. And then my other piece was Eyeshadow Eye, which is a little three-parter that I just wanted to play some changes, some ballad type stuff, and everybody brought in ballads. So at one point I looked at David, and David looked at me, and we're like, what's with all these ballads? There's a lot of ballads on this record. I said, we need something groovy. So I wrote Queen King, which is just a variation on King Queen, a song on Initiate, like an Afrobeat groove in 6, both of them are. And that speaks to Marcus' ability to do these octopus-like, sounds like two people like burying these grooves with another ostinato basically and a cued B section. And it's just an excuse for Craig to do whatever he wanted. And he just went right into this Fela Kuti mode on the organ, or I guess maybe it's the multi-box. I don't know if that's technically an organ.
It's a great sound.
It's an incredible sound. It sounds, but it also sounds really like a Fela record when it first comes into me. And that makes me happy.
Yeah.
So that was kind of more of a, what'd you call it, utilitarian choice musically, to just have a nice varied program. Because, with Diana, when Marcus brought that in as his cover song, I was like, whoa. I totally wimped out and said, like, there's no way I'm going to play this melody. I'm not going to do the Wayne Shorter melody. There's just, no, I can't do it. It's just not going to happen. So we ended up fully orchestrating it with me making loops that were basically every bar or two, depending on the common tones of the chords, the harmonic movement. And I gave David and Ben, the engineer, like all 4 or 5 choices per bar or per 2 bars. And then I let them edit it together however they wanted. And that became kind of the harmonic bed along with the piano. And then Craig's solos, it's just insane, just what he does. He chose to use the Celeste to play the melody, which I thought it was brilliant. So it becomes this whole other thing, which I think it needed to be. And we took a really long time with that one. There's a lot of stuff that Marcus did, tuning his tom-toms to the changes as well and playing tam-tams. It was kind of a production number, but it still has, I think, an intimate feeling about it. It doesn't sound too overdone or too big or whatever, because it's so intimate on the original on Native Dancer. It's just a beautiful duet.
Yeah, the record does not sound labored over. It doesn't sound overproduced. It's fascinating to me. I did the thing that, as a listener, is probably annoying for the artist to hear, but I went kind of deep into listening to Bend It because I was trying to figure out what was going on there, specifically around that bass ostinato. I was curious because you chose to play bass, and then I was like, and this is what he chose to do? Like, he's going to pick up a different instrument, and like I was so curious as to why you did that. And then to hear you say a lot of it was a loop is fascinating to me, because as I was listening to that track, it's one of my favorite things about creative music, when I couldn't tell who was making what sound. I love that. I love that.
Yeah, definitely. Craig and I eventually, and the same is true on the improv and all to some extent on Night Whistlers as well. Like, Craig and I get into some sonic psychedelia, and yeah, it's hard to tell what's what sometimes. And I, of course, love that.
Yeah.
The methodology of Bend It was the opposite of Queen King, in that Queen King, I played the bass live with Craig and Marcus, and then overdubbed the 12-string electric guitar and left room for myself to play this is my tribute to a certain West African early 70s fuzz guitar solo. And then on Bend It, I just looped the bass and we played to my loop, so we could have that freedom that you're talking about, where you kind of can't tell who's doing what. It starts to get pretty swirly, but the ostinato just keeps going because it was just going all by itself in our headphones.
Is it a stretch to ask or to even make the assertion that your gravitational pull towards that doubling of your lines and that almost like chorus overtone effect you explore, does that date back to the Allman Brothers?
Well, I mean, certainly, I always think two guitars are better than one.
Well, then you got to like the Outlaws and go for three.
Yeah, right. Or status quo. Yeah, I don't think it's so Allman Brothers-y. I think it's maybe it's more Beatles-y. I just think there are certain things about the unison guitar, and then later overtone exploration that I have to attribute to my obsession with sonic youth.
Yeah.
And the use of certain idiomatic sounds and an investigation of, to a certain extent, a non-scientific or non-doctrinaire microtonality factor. And then there's the whole, I don't know, rock and roll is certainly a big part of what you're asking me about. Whether it's the Allman Brothers band specifically, I'd have to say not really, but it's a big, resonating rock and roll sound that I've lived with, I guess, as my first inspiration in music besides Ravi Shankar. So Ravi Shankar, when I heard a live recording in school when I was 10,
Yeah.
that was the big first aha experience for me. And then the second was Jimi Hendrix. But in between there, there's also the Byrds. And if we're talking about doubled or like overtone laden guitar beauty, certainly those early Byrds records have that. And that's very influential on me. And that's one of the reasons, if not the reason, besides, I suppose, Ralph Towner, that I play so much 12 string. I just love it. And it's on the Trio of Bloom record. In fact, David Breskin was super sad, disappointed because I showed up without a 12 string. I just couldn't figure out whether or not I should bring one. And I couldn't figure out what, if I was going to, I didn't have anything in mind for it. So I didn't bring it. And we were driving, so I could have brought as many guitars as I wanted because we're driving from upstate New York down to the city. So I could have brought 6 or 7 guitars, I suppose, but I didn't bring a 12 string, and David was disappointed. So he called up Brandon Seabrook, and Brandon loaned me his because he had played one of mine that I had in Los Angeles, living at a friend's house for a few years, and loved it. And my friend videotaped him or, shot him with his phone and sent it to me. And of course, it's Brandon. He's shredding on this thing. So
he's a monster.
He's a completely terrifying monster. Yeah. And a lovely human. But, and I said, man, Brandon, you got to get a 12 string. And he did. He got the same kind that I was playing for years. So I borrowed his, that was for the record, which was super fun. I don't remember if I got to see him or not. I think it just showed up the morning before I got there or something because he was a busy boy. But yeah, 12 string is another example of exponential overtone beauty.
So you've given me a lot to unpack that's swaying me from my little checklist here, but something that I think about as sort of a hallmark of you is, I think of you as a collaborator and someone who does not necessarily draw attention to themselves. And even in your personality, as we're talking, you're very self-effacing, and you talk about when you don't hit the mark, like you're not sitting here boastful. Although I would imagine you have pride in your work. I don't I don't know. You don't come across as self-satisfied,
Well,
which to me, I would think that there's a certain openness. And I wonder what you get from your collaborations that feeds back into your own practice. Like what's the feedback loop from being in that role?
I think that it's just so inherently satisfying for me to be involved with the sound world. So when I play with people who are in their own way as invested in sound, not just in technique or notes or whatever, and have an openness to improvisation, then I'm in my happy place. As far as what I take away from it that's beyond or separate, say, solitary moments from these collaborations, I think all I'm doing is looking forward to the next collaboration, honestly. I don't know if I guess when I'm writing for improvisers, say my current quartet, but concentric quartet, I'm thinking less about writing the world's greatest composition than I am thinking about what would be a good way to interact with these individuals, and that, I don't know, will somehow create a really good environment for them to be themselves. And then when we're all ourselves all at the same time, then we might have a whole new sound that we love, which is, in the case of concentric quartets, definitely true. So it's really about maybe these collaborations. What I take away from the experience is the ability to think about how to structure encounters with other individuals based on what I felt was really successful or kind of marvelous about whatever the collaboration was that I just did. I'm just really lucky because I get to play with so many people from so many different avenues who are so invested in music itself for its own sake. And so that's all I've ever wanted to do since I was 12 years old, I suppose, is participate rather than dominate.
That actually is a much more succinct framing of it, of what I was thinking about before our call was participate rather than dominate. I think about, even something like when I always kind of view you as being forced into the spotlight during something like Impossible Germany. Like
Uh,
you retreat as soon as you're done with that
well,
with the crescendo there. Like you don't seem like that's where you want to be.
oh, well, I mean, I call Impossible Germany the blessing and the burden of my life. It's an incredible thing to have to do all the time, which was not the way it was initially designed. I don't think it just became what it is. It's like there's certain things I've
Whipping
observed
post.
sorry, oh yeah, well, there's certain things I've observed in life that took on a trajectory that you cannot manufacture. And certainly the Impossible Germany thing is one.
Yeah.
The biggest one I can think of is the Grateful Dead. You know, they're more popular than ever and they don't even exist as a band. The legacy and the tentacles that have gone out from that band, it's thousands and thousands of musicians doing that music, not just thousands and thousands of people going to hear people play that music that quite often were never even alive when that music was being made.
Yeah,
So
it's astounding.
it's an astounding phenomenon and one that you could not manufacture. It has its own life force. It's really wild. In the case of Impossible Germany, I really like trying to do it every night because Jeff has it on the set list almost every night. So, and I also love the music of that song. And we worked really hard on the 3 guitar parts at the time, when we were recording Sky Blue Sky. And every time we play it, I think it sounds beautiful as an arrangement.
Yeah.
And then, yeah, the onus is on me to do something utterly fabulous in A minor. And I try, and it's fun. It's really fun. Some nights I really just feel deflated, but other nights it's extremely emotional in a good way. I feel like I can levitate. And those are maybe a little more rare after all this time. But when it happens, it's exhilarating, and it just reinforces why I love playing music so much.
Yeah.
I'm very lucky in this regard.
The Tonearm will be right back after this break.
After listening to this episode, head to thetonearm.com, our online journal covering unexpected music and culture. This week on The Tonearm, we're featuring Polaris Music Prize winner Eve Jarvis, New York Jazz Fusion combo JMMR, Off-Kilter Pop Collective Constant Smiles, and a conversation with music journalist Grill Marcus on the new edition of Mystery Train. You'll find all this and more on The Tonearm. And while you're there, be sure to subscribe to our email newsletter. That's thetonearm.com. The Tonearm, putting a needle on the cultural wax.
And now, back to the Tonearm. Do you recognize in the moment when that song and your role in it is connecting with the audience, do you recognize, just to say it plainly, the love the audience has for you? I mean, that to me is what that song is about the audience getting to tell you, we're so glad you're here. I feel that when I'm in the crowd, I see how people react to you in that song, through that song. And it's a really special thing to witness.
Wow. I don't, honestly. I mean, I have to say, sounds really bullshit, but I don't look at the audience hardly at all. And doesn't help me. Everybody else in the band is very clued in with what's going on out there. And I'm not. I'm staring at the floor. I'm staring at my hands. We played, what you're talking about is people have told me who have been in the audience, who are my friends, this feeling that you're describing of their reaction to it. Because my feeling lately has been, perhaps we've done enough Impossible Germanies for a while, and the answer seems to be resounding no, we have not, which I find rather startling, honestly. But so I don't really notice. The worst, probably, I guess you'd say, like the most clueless I've been recently was when we played this last summer at the Royal Albert Hall for the first time. And, that's a big deal if you're a rock band, especially.
It's a real gig.
It's big. It sounds not great for amplified music. And everybody was sitting there in concert hall mode, which it doesn't bother me at all. Some rock and roll people don't like it when people are sitting. And I think that if you want people to stand, you probably shouldn't play in places that have seats. and just get a nice open floor, which I always like seeing for a Wilco show. Like, yep, all right, it's going to be a rock show. You know, we've got an open floor. So that conundrum is taken away out of the equation. But anyway, at the end of Impossible Germany, at Royal Albert Hall, going about my business, and found out later after the show that that was when everyone stood up, was after Impossible Germany, but I didn't even notice.
Yeah.
It's kind of sad that I just didn't even look, you know, I was just, and I think it was probably because I didn't think it was a particularly good solo, thinking, okay, what's the next song? Okay. Oh, well, that wasn't what I'd hoped for here at Royal Albert Hall, but I don't really remember. But if I didn't look at the audience at all, it's likely that I was either not thrilled with what I did, or sometimes I'm really super emotional. I can't look at the audience because I've got tears in my eyes and I don't want them to see. So I look at Jeff, and Jeff's always being very, you know, he's always calling a lot of attention to me at that point. So
hey, look at the vulnerable guy over there.
he's always basically egging the audience on to give me applause. It's what he's doing.
That's beautiful.
Man, I just heard his current Tweety band at Brooklyn Steel the other night. Wow. Okay. I mean, I don't want to go up too far off track here, but it was a beautiful concert with all that material from his new record, and all those, you know, those young players from Chicago who can all sing. The harmony vocals are incredible. It was beautiful. It was really great. Just thought I'd toss that out there.
Well, I mean, yeah, he needs the plug. He needs the help. One of the things that, you know, you've also, and you've further answered for me a question I asked you earlier, which is about what some of the collaborators may want when they bang the desk and say, "Get me Nels Cline." I can't help but think it's the knowledge of different idioms. And I think you might bring that somebody from maybe a conservatory background or just the creative music scene may or may not have. You know, you're gonna, because you travel so widely, put yourself in lots of different situations, but also come from maybe a more popular oriented background earlier in life than some other players. You know, you've carried. You're a real like integrationalist. You've brought it all along. It doesn't feel like you go through phases and leave it behind. It's like you figure out what to bring into, you know, whether it's the overtones or the microtonality from Sonic Youth. Like these things are all going into the toolbox, for lack of a better way to say it.
Yeah, it's funny. Sometimes I end up being asked to come in and record with somebody, and I feel like they actually have no idea what I do. And I'm supposed to do something very straightforward, and in a way that can be very difficult for me, or do something really traditional, which I try to do with Wilco. I mean, that's what I'm hearing in my head on a country song. I'm not hearing Sonic Youth on a country song. I'm hearing Clarence White or somebody that I can't even possibly emulate. But it's nice to try if that's what I'm hearing, and if that's what everybody in the band thinks sounds appropriate. But other times I sort of go in and with all my sound design kind of looping and psychedelic approach, and surprise people. Like they kind of didn't know, and then they like it and they want it on their music. But it's hard to know sometimes what to show up with gear wise. So some of the most straightforward playing I did that I'm thinking back on a while ago was on a Joan Osborne record.
Oh, that's funny.
She lives really close to where my wife Yuka and I used to live in Brooklyn, and went down to her basement with my stuff, and she was recording everything at home in her basement. And I played, I'm trying to remember the name of the record now, but it's from a few years ago. And I think I played on like 8 songs or something in one afternoon. And it was all very straightforward, and it felt good. It felt really, really good. Like I was just kind of in the zone. And everybody was really happy, and they didn't have me doing 4,000 takes of 1 minute. You know, I had an experience once with a, you know, rather popular artist who I will not mention in California, where I played for 2 hours plus on 1 minute of a like 8-minute piece during an already existing guitar solo, while this person brainstormed, and I tried to please this person and ended up, they didn't use what I did, and I was one of many people who had apparently played on this 1 minute. So those aren't the most fun sessions.
It's like a Steely Dan record.
Yeah, a little
Maybe
bit.
they should have just gotten Larry Carlton from the beginning.
Yeah, right. Or Dean Parks, or well, into like, how come nobody talks about how amazing Denny Diaz is? It's like,
I know.
okay, all right. So this thing with Joan was just really fun. So I left there feeling, I was doing like note bending and doing all this kind of more, blues rock kind of playing. But it was really fun because everybody was happy and the music was cool, the vibe was good. So I didn't present a whole bunch of weird loops and reverse sounds and microtonality to that. I did that once on a Ricky Lee Jones session, the microtonality part, and that was a really bad idea because it was my first impulse was to do this kind of like Thurston Moore guitar thing, and the producer came in on my headphones, Nels, your guitar it's a little out of tune. And I said, oh yeah, that's intentional. And then it was like big silence. I said, I'll change it. I'm switching to a regular guitar now. I had this open tune guitar. I thought this will be so marvelous, and like, well, wrong. And the session came out great. Ricky Lee was amazing to work.
I can imagine.
To work for. She was really, every take she did singing and playing acoustic guitar was perfect. The record's great. It's actually the song that I'm on is probably my least favorite song on the record, but the record's called The Evening of My Best Day. And no one heard this record. It was on a subsidiary label of Virgin called V2. And I think she'd been in the Village Recorders for a long time working on this record, but wow, it's a fantastic record. Bill Frisell Trio anchors some of the best tracks on it. Bill and Tony Scher and Kenny Wollesen.
Oh, I remember that, yeah.
The first track on it is about George W. Bush, and it's called Ugly Man, and it's really good. It's really good, but the whole record's good.
Wow.
She, I guess she's been living in New Orleans for years now, and has a duo with Mike Dillon that I need to check out. Scott Amendola just told me about it.
She's a treasure. She's a treasure.
And apparently it's utterly profound. So I'm going to I have to remember to do a YouTube search and find some live footage of that, because apparently it's quite amazing. I haven't talked to her in years, but she was really cool.
When you mention Joan Osborne, when I think of her as the kind of singer that in the studio or even on stage, she probably can stand 6 feet away from the microphone and still melt the electronics. She's a powerhouse.
She is. If that Standing in the Shadow of Motown movie, she crushes.
Yeah.
Really.
Tell me a little bit about your relationship and your sort of citizenship in the Brooklyn music community. What is it about that environment that's so rooted for you? Like, what keeps bringing you back to that community?
Wow. Well, I feel honored to interact with that community on any level at this point. It's a deep, deep bench. It's so deep that I don't even know how deep it is on many levels, stylistically or whatever. Really, it's nuts. I've just been obsessed with New York City for decades, and my parents love New York. One of our most wonderful family friends is one of New York's kind of He passed away late last year, but one of New York's sort of exemplary cultural, environmental, educational movers and shakers. And so my parents had this kind of love affair with New York City, and particularly also in my dad's case, the parents both loved Broadway plays and musicals. And my dad especially loved certain musicals. And we used to go with our friend to all these shows. And so growing up in Los Angeles, I feel like my brother Alex and I saw more plays and musicals than we did movies in the movie theater. And if it's not more, it's probably equal, but I think it might be more.
Wow.
So that was just my first impressions of New York were probably really, well, it's like a foreign country. If you're coming from Los Angeles and you go, as we did with our family in the late 60s, in 67 and 68, it was really like nowhere else, you know, just like we used to vacation in San Francisco sometimes, but you just drive up there. You know, in this case, we're 3,000 miles away. And in this place where there are hardly any blonde people back then. And so being blonde, identical twins, you kind of stood out in a lot of places in the world, it turns out. But then I became really interested, as did my brother, in so-called jazz music. And so, you know, New York City and jazz are like breakfast and orange juice. So it's just one of those things. We went on a jazz pilgrimage in 1976 to try to go hear loft jazz and go hear Newport at New York. We heard the Herbie Hancock retrospective and the tribute to Coltrane with McCoy Tyner's group and Elvin Jones' group. Went to go hear a whole bunch of people, and like Dave Liebman and Lookout Farmer at the Vanguard. And so that was really when I fell in love with New York pretty seriously, even though it was a very, if you think back on it historically at that time, it was a very challenged and dirty and kind of unsafe place, or very unsafe in certain areas, I guess. And so I started following the music scene and the culture of New York, and that extended also to what was happening in the late 70s and early 80s with, you know, no wave, so-called, and with indie rock. And so it'd be Sonic Youth and Swans and DNA and Teenage Jesus and the Jerks. I ended up playing with Lydia Lunch for a while. So I was following the New York scene. And so when I finally started living there, it was really because I fell in love with a woman who lived there, finally started living there. So it took years and years for me to get there on a regular basis. And then I'd already played at the original Knitting Factory with Mark Dresser and Mark Feldman, or I played with my trio and Tim Burns' Blood Count, because my brother knew Tim from his associations with Julius Hemphill, as did I later. We knew a lot of people. Elliot Sharp was always incredibly kind and generous to me, letting me stay at his place. And I started playing with Zena Parkins and Andrea Parkins and Tom Rainey. And one thing sort of just led to another. And there I was, once I was living there, already kind of well known to a lot of people. So to me, it just was about all these marvelous players and wanting to play with them and create with them. But there are marvelous players everywhere. It's just that in New York City, there are just about 10 times more, because so many people move there to go to school and stay or whatever. A lot of people I know who moved there to become monster musicians don't like living in New York City. You know, they can't wait to leave. They just go there, get their schooling, whether it's like Berkeley or NEC or the New School or wherever, NYU. They do what they do, and then they try to get some gigs and get on some tours or whatever it is that you have to do, and then they want to leave right away. And that's not me. We left because of the pandemic, and I'm old, and my wife had been dreaming of living in the country for, well before I ever met her. But we're there all the time because this is where we do our work. And I'm always incredibly happy to be there. We kind of have, I guess it's kind of like my musical life. I've been able to have my cake and eat it too in this insane way, you know, play in a prominent rock band and play this brilliant songwriters' songs, and then also have a couple of my own bands and then collaborate with all these musicians from all over the world, mostly in New York at this point, but really everywhere, just about. So now we have the country and the city thing. The city thing is staying in our friend's house. We don't own a place in the city. There's no way I can't really even afford to buy a house upstate yet, but working on that. But it's nice to be able to go back and forth. And as far as feeling part of the community in Brooklyn. It's like, I marvel at it from a distance periodically, but it is feels pretty natural.
Yeah. I left in 2016 and it was really starting to accelerate. And something that strikes me when I go back that makes me feel really good about the health of the scene is that there's a really nice, almost like feeder network of venues. Like there's dive bars and Gowanus that put on creative music or jazz or like, and like that's what you need. You need to be able to go to a place that seats 10 people all the way up to, a nice room like Roulette or something. It's just it seems to bode well. Like there's a really nice ecosystem.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think that if you're talking about a dive bar and Gowanus, might be talking about Lowlands.
Yeah.
But Lowlands isn't really a dive, but it's a bar, and it's just because basically Tim Byrne lives around the corner and wanted to play in his local bar. And he got tired of all the other venue, I guess, situations. And that's some of the best music I've heard in the last 30 years. When I'm in New York City and he's playing, I go. And I played with him once with Ellie Stemmesetter and Tom Rainey. It was really fun. But when I go and hear Greg Belalchi and Tom and maybe Chris Potter is playing or John Hebert, I mean, it's some of the best music you'll hear anywhere, in my opinion. So
I agree.
So I'm happy to go there. Or, the Concentric Quartet just played Littlefield and that all around the same area, it was the Bell House and all that.
Yeah.
It was a really good place for us to play, I think. And open floor. It's a rock show. No.
That's right. Yeah. Yeah. Well, you mentioned the original Knitting Factory, and I have one fond memory in particular I love to share when I talk with artists about. One night, it was a year or two before he passed, Sonny Chirac did 2 sets there one night. Just here it is, 30 some odd years later, and I can, it's vivid. And that was such an incredible room, and he was such an incredible musician and human. But I'm curious, when did you first encounter Zorn?
Oh, well, that's would have been 1978, maybe. Yeah, because a good friend of mine and my brothers that we played with music with in high school, named Lee Kaplan, became really invested in improvised music. I guess it was kind of influence in some way. And he and I were working at Rhino Records in West Los Angeles together. And along with this guy named Ivan Spiegel and owner of Rhino Records, Richard Foos, kind of got a concert series going that Lee booked for local improvisers, but also improvisers that he wondered, about, because they weren't playing Los Angeles. They would go and play the Keystone or Mackenzie or whatever in the Bay Area, and they wouldn't come down to Los Angeles. It was kind of, people were avoiding it like the plague. So among the concerts that he presented, one of them was a 2-night event, which was very unusual. It was always on Sundays, but he did a Sunday, Monday with Eugene Chadbourne and John Zorn duo. John, I think, was like just fresh out of college at that point, and they were doing a tour on Greyhound buses with Eugene Chadbourne wearing all white, like he was dressed like a milkman with no change of clothes, as far as I know. It's just crazy and bold. And I don't think I had a conversation with John Zorn at that point, but that was my first encounter with his playing, with his thing. I think the only time I saw him in the 80s in New York, because he was doing all that stuff at the Pyramid Club, all these things that I missed. But my brother Alex and I did go hear Cobra at Roulette, and I think it was the first Cobra.
Yeah.
And that was in 84. And that was really, really mind blowing. There was never, and well, we had just been in Europe, actually, my brother and me, with Julius Hemphill and the Jaw Band, and played in Willisau, our first gig in Europe, my first gig in Europe ever, in Switzerland. And we opened for John. And John was at that time playing he had put a group together with David Moss, Christian Marclay, and Arto Lindsay. And then George Lewis sat in actually with them. And so there I was, ran into Arto and John at a gas station somewhere on that tour. I remember Arto looking at my regular Fender hardshell case for my Strat, my horrible Strat that I used to play, and just basically shaking his head like, are you crazy? You know, he was right. The case got destroyed by the airlines, but it's a Fender, you know, you just like try to break it. It was pretty sturdy, but anyway. So then days later, I was standing in the corner of 4th and Broadway to go into Tower Records, and there was Christian Markley. I didn't realize that he lived in New York City because he's Swiss, and we were playing in Willisau, and he was doing all this wild stuff with Caliphone turntables. I thought he lived in Switzerland, but then we just said hello. And the next thing I knew, he was on this Cobra gig. So Christian became sort of like on my radar very heavily in 1 week.
Amazing.
It was really wild. The band, the Cobra band at that time was the 3 guitarists, I always like to tell people, were Ardo Lindsay, Bill Frisell, and Elliot Sharp.
Murderer's Row.
Yeah, so it was a lot of stuff going on there. John doing the, holding up the cards and doing the bird calls.
Yeah, that's really something. I'll leave you with this. I was fortunate enough to see some of the runner shows when he turned 40, when he turned 50, and then that marathon show when he turned 60. A couple of years ago, my son started college in San Francisco, and he called me one day and he said, "Dad, I'm going to see Electric Masada for Zorn's 70th." And I said, "I did okay as a dad."
Yeah, man. Well, John's been super kind to me, and I've done a few of when the Old Stone was still happening. I did a few of those improv nights. And that's the only time that he and I played together, but that's super fun. He's always been really very kind and generous to me and some of my pals.
Yeah, beautiful stuff. Nels, thank you so much, not least of which for all the music.
Well, thank you, Lawrence.
Yeah, it's really wonderful to connect with you.
Thanks for listening.
Yeah, and I will continue to. Next time you have something to talk about, I hope you come back.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Yep. Thank you for listening to Trio of Bloom. I don't know if this band's ever going to play anywhere. It's like the attempt to schedule Trio of Bloom they've been failing consistently so far. But also, I wonder what we'll do, because like I said, there's a lot of overdubbing and stuff on this record, but it should be interesting. I love the jam on it, that David Breskin called Bloomers.
Oh, that's sort of the emotional centerpiece of the record.
Yeah, I think must be why he put it in the center of the record. But I could just do a whole night of that.
Yeah, that piece is something else. I might go listen to that right now.
Okay, crank it up. Thanks, Lawrence.
I shall.
All right.
Take care,
man.
Peace. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you so much, Nels Cline, and thank you for tuning into the Tonearm. If you enjoyed this conversation, you'll like at least one more of the nearly 300 episodes available in our free archive at thetonearm.com. While you're there, consider becoming a supporter. You do that by giving us your email address. The Tonearm is executive produced and hosted by me, Lawrence Purrier. We're produced and marketed by Michael Donaldson. Editing and sound design is by Terry Grant. Our theme music is by Birdie, spelled B-U-R-D-Y. Thanks for listening. Be safe and stay in touch.